welcome back. Now, for the first time in 54 years, the United Nations Security Council has exclusively discussed the Kashmir dispute. The meeting was called at Pakistan's request, supported by China, after India annexed Kashmir, following 70 years of illegal occupation. Now, for more on this meeting, we are joined by Dr. Maliha Lodhi. You are Pakistan's permanent representative to the United Nations. So firstly, ma'am, why is this meeting so significant and what was achieved in the meeting?
The most important aspect of the UN Security Council meeting was the fact that the voice of the Kashmiri people was listened to. It's a jailed prison that Jammu and Kashmir has become. So their voice needed to be listened to, and it was listened to in the council meeting. So two other aspects of the council meeting are extremely important from Pakistan's point of view. One, the fact that the meeting took place at all testified to the international nature of the dispute and nullified India's claim and its propaganda that Jammu and Kashmir is an internal matter. Or secondly, the most important aspect of the meeting was also that there was almost unanimous concern about the grave human rights situation in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The third aspect of the council meeting, which was significant, is that UN Security Council resolutions, which are already there, which call for a plebiscite so that the people of Jammu and Kashmir can freely determine their own destiny, those were reaffirmed during the discussions in the council.
Right. So Prime Minister Imran Khan has said the silence of the international community over Kashmir encouraged India's human rights violations. So do you believe that will change now?
We've entered a significantly different phase in terms of world attention on the plight of the Kashmiris. If you look at international opinion as reflected in leading newspapers like the New York Times, the Guardian, the Financial Times, you name it, and Western public opinion as reflected in these publications are very clear. Concern for human rights and urging India to halt its crackdown as well as its lockdown in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. In addition, if you look at the statements coming out from virtually every human rights organization, reputable human rights organization in the world, all have spoken out. All have asked India to halt the kind of restrictions, abuse, and violations that are going on.
And coming to you lastly, what is Pakistan's next move after this meeting?
We will assess the situation. We will see what would be the next step. But one thing I can assure you, Pakistan's diplomatic efforts, which have intensified since August 5 in response to India's illegal annexation of Jammu and Kashmir, those efforts will be stepped up, and we will continue to ensure that we are able to act on behalf of the Kashmiri people.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maliha Lodhi, Pakistan's permanent representative for the United Nations, expressing her thoughts about yesterday's meeting in which she says the international community over Kashmir has not encouraged India, but the voice of Kashmiris has been heard. Now, earlier, moving on, Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan apprised United States President Donald Trump of the situation in occupied Kashmir. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says Prime Minister Khan also discussed the UN Security Council meeting on Kashmir during a telephone conversation with Trump. Qureshi says both leaders have agreed to remain in contact over the Kashmir issue. He says Pakistan has contacted 4 of the 5 permanent UNSC members over the Kashmir issue. The foreign minister says Pakistan Prime Minister Khan and President Trump have also discussed the situation in Afghanistan. This comes after India illegally revoked the special status of occupied Kashmir on August 5th. The United States says Afghan peace talks are moving in the right direction. The White House statement came after U.S. President Donald Trump met with his national security official to discuss the dialogue with the Taliban. The meeting was attended by Defense Secretary Mark Esper, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Joseph Dunford. Trump described the meeting as very good, saying the U.S. and Taliban are looking for a deal to end the war. The U.S. and the Taliban representatives recently met for the 8th round of talks in Doha. Moving on, the White House has approved an $8 billion sale of warplanes to Taiwan. The U.S. State Department says Taipei will receive 66 F-16s under the deal. China's foreign ministry says it has lodged a solemn representation with the U.S. against the sale. Spokesperson Hua Chunying says the deal violates the One China principle. This follows a $2 billion U.S. arms sales to Taiwan in July. It included 100 tanks and 250 Stinger missiles. China considers Taiwan a renegade province. The purchase comes amid heightened trade tensions between the U.S. and China. The U.S. Justice Department has obtained a court warrant for the seizure of an Iranian tanker captured by British Marines off Gibraltar last month. The court order came after Judge Gibraltar allowed the release of the vessel, detained for violating European Union sanctions on Syria. The warrant says the ship Grace 1 and the 2 million barrels of oil it carries are subject to forfeiture. It also ordered the seizure of $1 million from an account linked to Paradise Global Trading. The Justice Department claims the company is associated with businesses acting for Iran's Revolutionary Guards. Meanwhile, Grace 1 has been renamed, reflagged and moved its position, but is still anchored at Gibraltar. Meanwhile, 15 civilians have been killed in a Russian airstrike in the northern Syrian province of Idlib. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says the air raid targeted refugee camps in the town of Hars. It says 6 children were among the dead. The French Foreign Ministry has condemned the attack and called for an immediate end to the fighting in Idlib. Over the past week, the Syrian army has advanced towards the rebel stronghold of Al-Sheikhoun. A U.S.-Turkey Joint Operations Center will begin working next week to oversee a safe zone in northern Syria. Turkey's defense minister says the two countries have reached a general agreement on coordination and control of airspace. The statement comes after a U.S. delegation visited southern Turkey to begin work on the center. The joint center was agreed upon last week after days of tense negotiations between the two countries. The planned buffer near the Turkish frontier would be kept free of combatants and heavy weapons. Moving on, Israeli forces have wounded 67 Palestinians during weekly protests along the Gaza border. Palestine's health ministry says Israeli troops fired live ammunition and rubber bullets at protesters. The demonstrations are calling for Israel to lift its blockade of the Gaza Strip. Officials say over 300 Palestinians have been killed since the start of weekly protests last year. A Palestinian driver was also shot dead by occupation forces after he allegedly entered an illegal Jewish settlement block in the West Bank. Meanwhile, U.S. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib has rejected Israel's offer to make a humanitarian visit instead of an official tour to the occupied West Bank. Tlaib said she cannot comply with oppressive conditions being imposed by Israel. Meanwhile, 2 ISIS militants have been killed in an Iraqi airstrike in the eastern province of Diyala. The head of Iraq's Security Committee, Sadiq al-Husseini, says 2 of the terrorist group's financiers have also been captured. Al-Husseini says security forces acted on intelligence reports. Despite repeated military operations, he says ISIS remnants are hiding out in rugged areas near the border with Iran. The Saudi-led military coalition fighting in Yemen has intercepted a Houthi drone launched at the Abha airport in the south of the kingdom. A spokesperson for the Yemeni rebels, Yahya Saria, claims the attack caused the suspension of air traffic at Abha airport. The Saudi state media says a drone targeting the kingdom was shot down. The opposition Liberal Democrat Party has unveiled its candidate to lead an emergency UK government. The Liberal Democrat leader Joe Swinson nominated former Labour Deputy Leader Harriet Harman and Tory veteran Kenneth Clarke. Rather than name party members, Swinson said the Liberal Democrats preferred alternative leaders for a unity government to stop a no-deal Brexit. She said the Labour and Conservative veterans agreed to assume the role. Earlier this month, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn called for a no-confidence vote in Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government. Corbyn suggested he would subsequently lead a caretaker government and call a snap election. Liberal Democrat leader Swinson has refused to support Corbyn. Meanwhile, Greenland has dismissed the idea of being sold to the United States after reports said US President Donald Trump raised idea of buying the Danish territory. Greenland's Foreign Minister Annie Lone Bagger says Arctic Island is open for business but not for sale. Danish politicians have poured scorn on Trump's idea. Trump is due to visit Denmark in September. Greenland has long been coveted by world powers because of its natural resources and strategic location in the North Atlantic. Denmark turned down a $100 million American offer for Greenland in 1946. Two Ebola cases have been confirmed in the Democratic Republic of Congo's South Kivu region for the first time. Health officials say cases open up for a new front in the fight against the outbreak, which has killed over 1,800 people this year. Health officials and aid workers say virus can establish a foothold in the densely populated urban center. Congo's first Ebola case was detected in mid-July. Since then, the World Health Organization has warned spread of the disease could accelerate. Congo is taking steps to counter Ebola with the help of African Union and UN. Coming up in the bulletin next after a short break is... Welcome back. Now moving on to the news stories. Thousands of policymakers from 180 countries will meet in Geneva tomorrow to tighten rules protecting endangered species. Specialists will evaluate changes to regulations and protection listings under the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. The Convention's Secretary General Yvonne Higuero says the conference will seek to extend protection to additional species threatened by human activity. Discussions in Geneva will focus on illegal trade in ivory, rhino horn and endangered species amid growing alarm over increasing extinction rates. The 4-year-old treaty regulates trade in over 35,000 plant and animal species. It also provides a mechanism to help crack down on illegal trade and impose sanctions on countries violating rules. The meeting comes after a UN report said 1 million species are on the brink of extinction. Now, as sea levels rise due to global warming, time is running out for Indonesia's capital city of Jakarta. Environmental experts warn a third of the city could be underwater by 2050. As weather patterns change, large swathes of land have already begun disappearing at a faster rate. More in this report.
Indonesia's capital isn't only sinking because of rising temperatures. Rapid, out-of-control urbanization is also to blame. Without a piped water system, homes and local industry are forced to tap into natural aquifers. Experts say this practice causes some parts of Jakarta to sink 25 centimeters a year.
Back in 1981, this area was land, but it was muddy land. It could be flooded during a high tide, but just a little. Over the years, the water level is slowly rising.
The local government seems to have accepted the city's fate has already been sealed. Indonesian leader Joko Widodo has already announced the capital will be moving to the island of Borneo. Meanwhile, residents are hoping walls along the shoreline at the most vulnerable areas will keep the water from rising further.
Now why has the water level become higher than my home and I am now below water level? Maybe because the seawater is eating up the soil little by little. That's what I know. But luckily, we now have that seawall.
If groundwater extraction isn't curbed, the city could be gone within a few decades. Jakarta is home to 10 million residents.
In the US, deep-fried corn dogs and democracy are mixing at the Iowa State Fair. It is expected over 1 million people will be at this event this year, which is a must-stop for 2020 presidential hopefuls. 23 Democrats and Republican primary challenger to President Donald Trump will present their case to Iowa's people during the fair's 11-day run.
Thanks for stopping by to vote.
Here at the Iowa State Fair, visitors can vote for their favorite presidential candidate, more than a year out from the 2020 elections. The ballots at this largely agricultural fair are corn kernels, and the many Democratic candidates are all represented. On the Republican side, Donald Trump appears all but guaranteed his party's nomination.
Trend today is all Republicans are voting for Donald Trump. All Democrats are split, mostly with Biden at 35%.
Nice to see you again.
The former vice president is the frontrunner in national polls and is treated like a movie star here. But even the less well-known candidates hit up the fair, with the hopes of making a name for themselves in this early voting state. The fair is a crucial way for candidates to connect with the voters who could make or break their presidential dreams, but not without a little fun, in the form of pig races and fried corn dog tastings. Mike is taking his voting responsibility very seriously. The environmental activist went to see every single Democratic candidate at the fair this year.
Yeah.
I don't think it's dividing the party, but I think we need to start weeding some of them out to eliminate them. I think they need to self-select and say, I'm only a 1%.
The world where freedom.
In July 2020, the Democratic National Convention will finally reveal their pick to face Donald Trump. And this predominantly white and Christian state, whose population represents only 1% of voters in the U.S., will ultimately determine who stays in the race.
Now, with the business stories, Turkey's military pension fund, OYAK, has signed a provisional agreement to take over British Steel. It says the deal by its affiliate, Ater Holding, will close by the end of this year. The British Steel deal would potentially save thousands of jobs. Britain has welcomed the deal, but a workers' union has urged the government to protect the industry from damage caused by Brexit. British Steel was forced into liquidation on May 22nd due to a lack of funding to secure its operations. Now let's have a look at the weather update across the world. With the weather update, we come to the end of this bulletin. For more news and update, keep watching Indus News.